Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Social Emotional Teaching and Learning Virtual Institute Open House. My name is Taylor Hausburg, and I am an EDD student at Penn GSE, studying Social Emotional Learning and Teacher Education. I also work with the Penn GSE Center for Professional Learning, and I am the director of this Social Emotional Teaching and Learning Institute. In this session, the goals are to one, learn a little bit about how to backwards plan for critical SEL, which is really at the heart of this program. And we'll talk about what that is and why it's important in just a moment. And also to understand how this institute can further your learning in this field. To that end, we'll start with a brief introduction to critical SEL. We'll then dive into an overview of the Institute. We'll then have some time to address any questions you might have about this program and have a quick closing. So what is social emotional learning, or SEL? Well, there are lots of definitions for SEL. And so the definition that we use in this program is the process of developing social emotional skills, knowledge, and mindsets, or ways of thinking about, feeling towards, and engaging with ourselves, each other, and the world. Now, SEL, on the one hand, is becoming more and more popular in schools as teachers and communities recognize the importance of soft skills. But on the other hand, it's also facing some important critiques. Critical scholars like Dina Simmons say that SEL, devoid of examination of systems of oppression, faces the risk of becoming white supremacy with a hug. And so what we need in schools is not just SEL, but critical SEL, or SEL that one attends to the benefits and limitations of instructional choices, and that's critical with a little c. And we also need SEL that attends to criticality with a big C, or that takes into consideration power, privilege, oppression, equity, inequity, and justice and injustice. So in this institute, we think about how we can use the backwards planning approach to planning for our teaching and learning goals and apply that to our social emotional learning goals. Now, typically, backwards planning entails these 4 steps: identifying your vision and goals, then breaking that goal down into its component skills and knowledge, determining evidence of success, and then planning to teach each skill and each piece of knowledge. But how do we apply this to SEL in a critical way? Well, for the first step, it's not enough just to identify our SEL vision and goal. Rather, what we need to do is co-construct that vision and goals with our students, with our colleagues, and with our communities. So we can ask our community, how do you envision a graduate of our class, of our school, or a member of our organization? What social emotional skills, knowledge, and mindsets do and don't they exhibit? And what are some examples from our own community, right? Because it's important to think about, when we're setting goals, whose priorities do those goals represent? Do they represent my goals, or do they represent our students' goals, our community's goals? And also, where does our understanding of what these goals look like come from? Right? How can we draw on culturally relevant and community-based examples of resilience, of mindfulness, of collaboration in practice, and use those to drive our vision and our teaching and learning process, rather than an example from my life that may or may not be relevant to the lives of the students who I teach? Secondly, it's not enough just to break that goal down into component skills and knowledge. Rather, we need to also attend to how these goals connect to identity and criticality. So, drawing on Gholdy Mohammed's Hill model of literacy, we can think about how do our social emotional goals connect to who we are, who others say we are, and who we desire to be. That's identity. And how do they speak to power, privilege, oppression, equity, inequity, justice, injustice? So let's take, for example, collaboration. If that's an SEL goal of ours, then a component skill of collaboration might be learning how to facilitate a conversation, how to facilitate collaborative work. A piece of knowledge related to collaboration might be that different ideas, opinions, and perspectives are a resource to collaborative work, not an obstacle or a barrier to consensus, but rather an asset that we can draw on as we collaborate. Now, in terms of identity, it's important for students to recognize as they're learning about how to collaborate effectively that not only do they have meaningful contributions to offer teams, but so do others, right? So who am I in a group and how do I work with groups? How do I interact with others as I'm collaborating? And finally, in terms of criticality, you know, when groups are collaborating with each other, whose voices are privileged? Who is listened to? Who is ignored? Right? Considering these questions related to power are just as important as thinking about the skills and knowledge and mindsets that we need to collaborate effectively. Next, rather than simply determining evidence of success, it's important to differentiate, to understand, and to celebrate evidence of success. So what I mean is, consider how might collaboration or whatever social emotional mindset or skill you're teaching look different in different contexts for different individuals. Right? Collaboration, for example, in one setting can look like taking the lead, and in another, it can look like stepping back and letting somebody else contribute to the conversation. Right? It's also important to think about what are the barriers and challenges that might be preventing someone from practicing the skill or mindset, and how do we know? Right? Collaboration might be difficult for someone, might be difficult for a student because they have a fear of relying on others or because they don't trust the other people who they're collaborating with. And that's important to recognize because it will inform the instructional choices that we make later on. Right? Instructional strategies are tools, and it's important to use the right tool to solve the right problem. And finally, where are we already seeing evidence of mastery? Rather than just looking for what students are lacking, how can we celebrate the successes that we're already seeing in our classroom, in our community, as they relate to collaboration? Right? Taking a resource orientation to learners' abilities rather than just looking for what they're lacking. And finally, rather than just planning to teach each component skill or piece of knowledge, it's important to praise, prioritize, and plan to teach each component in multiple ways. So think about what are we already doing to reinforce these goals, right? To teach collaboration, and how could we build on the successes that we've already laid the foundations for? When are certain instructional strategies useful and what are their limits? How might these strategies need to be adapted in light of what's happening in our lives and in our communities? And finally, where should we start and why? Right? So as we think about the sorts of instructional strategies that we might use to support collaboration or resilience or mindfulness or empathy or whatever the social emotional learning goal may be, it's important to lay out our options and think through the advantages and the disadvantages, right? So for example, again, take collaboration. Um, one intervention might be explaining the importance of collaboration, right? That could be especially useful if students don't really understand why they're collaborating on a certain project. Another intervention might be assigning roles, but that might be particularly useful if students are struggling to distribute responsibility, right? So maybe students do understand the importance, they're just struggling to divvy up the work amongst themselves. So assigning roles can be a particularly useful intervention in that situation. And maybe if students aren't collaborating because of a lack of trust in each other, then maybe neither of those interventions is the right place to start. And rather, maybe it's important to start with some trust building exercises to build a safe or a brave space in our classroom that is conducive to authentic collaboration. And so as you're thinking about how to plan for critical SEL, I'd encourage you to think through the backwards planning process, but also apply a critical lens as you're determining your SEL goals and your instructional decisions. Now, I say all of this and I explain this process because this understanding of SEL and this process of planning for SEL in a critical way is really the foundation of the Social Emotional Teaching and Learning Institute. In this program, we use this critical SEL planning process as a guide, and then we build on that foundation over the course of 4 sessions. So in session 1, we practice noticing how social emotional teaching and learning is happening everywhere and all of the time. We're also organized into home teams or groups of participants who share similar professional backgrounds and who you explore these questions and topics with throughout the Institute. In session 2, we then take the process that I just explained and we practice applying it to collaboration, empathy, leadership, mindfulness, or resilience. And you get to choose which social emotional learning goal you want to focus on for that session, and then learn strategies for supporting that in your own classroom or organization. In session 3, we talk about the importance of modeling the same SEL goals that we want to teach. So if we want our students to learn collaboration, why is it so important for me as a teacher to model collaboration? Right? And we're joined by Angela Duckworth in that session, who introduces a protocol called WHOOP, which is an intention setting protocol that can help us clarify our intentions for ourselves, our social emotional development goals, and then think through how we're going to put them into action. And then finally, in the 4th and final session, we're joined by experienced practitioners from the workshop school in Philadelphia to share their wisdom of practice and how they go about social emotional teaching and learning. And we also have an opportunity to discuss our lingering questions with our fellow participants. And so with that, I hope that you will consider joining us for this program. If you're interested in accessing the backwards planning template, you can access that at tinyurl.com/SETL planning copy. And if you're interested in learning more about this institute and registering for it, then you can visit tinyurl.com/SETL Virtual Institute. Now, keep in mind that registration closes on October 28th, but if you register earlier by October 10th, you save $150. And finally, as an added reason to join us, if you are a Pennsylvania educator, you can earn Act 48 credits for your participation in this program. And we also have scholarships available for School District of Philadelphia teachers. So thank you so much for joining us for this open house. And I hope to see you at the Social Emotional Teaching and Learning Institute in November. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your attention to SEL and for the good work that you do in your school and in the world.